Hello there, welcome to my very first ever Pokemon Go raid guide. Currently, right now, the legendary Pokemon that's out is Regice. Now, Regice has been out for a little bit, so a lot of you, or probably the vast majority of you, have already battled and caught Regice already. But in case you haven't, or in case you're looking to maximize the efficiency for your raiding, I made this video to help you guys out. I hope you like it. So, first of all, I wanted to quickly explain what the Regis are all about. So, in the main series game, in the 3rd generation, the very last town that you would arrive in was called Pacific-Log Town. Pacific-Log Town was this town that was kind of floating on the ocean. Apparently it was on top of a colony of Corsola. And so, the legend is, the town, the ancestors of the town, have always lived on the ocean. They were born and they died on boats. They were constantly traveling around the ocean. And the legend also stated that the reason they lived like this was because they were in search of something. That's where the Regis come in. The legendary Titans, Regice, Regirock, and Registeel, were in 3 separate chambers scattered across the Hoenn region, the area that you would play the 3rd generation in. And so near Pacific-Log Town, there was a section of the ocean that was just covered in riptides everywhere, and you would have to ride very specific riptides in the right order in order to land on this ring-shaped island. On the center of the ring-shaped island, you could dive down into the water with your Pokemon, travel in a underwater tunnel, and at the end you would arrive in a cave that had an air pocket so that you could move around freely and breathe inside the cave. And so this cave had these monuments, these stone monuments, with 26 symbols on them. In actuality, these symbols are the same symbols that one would use to feel Braille with. It was visual Braille. So you would have to use these Braille symbols in order to solve puzzles that were engraved on the back of the wall. There were 3 different puzzles that you had to solve in order, and once you solved the last puzzle, the 3 separate chambers that the Regis were hiding in would open up, and then you could go to each chamber individually and catch them. So it was quite the adventure. They were really exciting Pokemon to encounter because of all the work and puzzles and adventure you would have to go through before reaching them. In the 4th generation, there actually is a 4th Regi, and it's the king of the other 3 Regis, and it's called Regice. I'll go back into the story behind Regice once he comes out after the 4th gen has been released, but for now I'll just keep it to the story of the original 3 Regis. So now let's talk about the Regis in Pokemon Go. This video will be about Regice, and as the other Regis come out, I'll make raid guides about them. So, as with all the Regis, they're very defensive Pokemon. They're not necessarily the best attackers. I don't see people really making a whole lot of use out of them, but, you know, Regice is the only ice legendary besides Articuno, so if you really want to use an ice type, let's say you're fighting a Dragonite or something, then maybe it could help you. Regice's DPS isn't very high. I mean, Articuno's is quite a bit higher, but, you know, maybe if you really like Regice and you want to invest your Stardust into that, you could use it as a kind of defensive alternative to an Ice-type attacker. Won't finish off the enemy as quickly as some others, but maybe you wouldn't have to waste as many potions that way. So let's go over what the CP value would be for a perfect Regice. A perfect Regice would be at 1764. 1764 is a perfect Regice. Now, if for some reason here in June and July you are actually experiencing snowy weather in Pokemon Go, a perfect Regice's CP would be 2205. 2205 for a perfect Regice in snowy weather. And just in case you were curious, the lowest CP values for these Regices would be 1682 for non-weather boosted, and 2103 for weather boosted. Now, the minimum amount of people you're going to want to take on Regice would be about 6. Now, that's if you have decent counters. If you have really good counters for Regice, which I'll mention here in just a moment, then you could probably do it with 4 people. But that's if you have the best possible counters maxed out all the way to probably level 40. And for those perfect counters, I did quite a bit of research for you guys, and as you know, the best counters for certain raids can get kind of complicated. There's a lot to take into account, right? There's generally 2 things that people look at that would make a certain Pokemon the best counter for a raid boss. One being DPS, damage per second. So DPS is generally what people are really looking for in a good counter. What it means, if a Pokemon has the highest possible DPS against a raid boss, it means that they can do damage the fastest. And the other one is TDO, total damage output. This takes into account a Pokemon's defensive abilities. So that's where it, kind of gets a little bit complicated, because sure, one Pokemon might be able to do the most possible damage. Let's use, in this case, Breloom. I'm going to bring up Breloom pretty soon. So Breloom is actually really high on the list of total DPS. However, because Breloom is really squishy and doesn't last very long, you're actually not getting a whole lot of damage out of Breloom. Sure, it does pretty close to the highest DPS, but you also have to take into account the fact that when a Pokemon faints, it's wasting time that you could be spending attacking. So in my opinion, I like to find a really good balance between Pokemon with high DPS and high TDO. So I'm going to explain to you guys the highest DPS Pokemon on the list, in case you're interested. And then I'll tell you the list of Pokemon that I put together that I feel have the best balance between DPS and TDO. So I'm going to read off the list I made of the 7 highest DPS Pokemon that you can use in Pokemon Go currently against Regice. So those Pokemon would be, in order from highest working my way down, Moltres with Fire Spin and Overheat, Machamp with Counter or Karate Chop and Dynamic Punch, Breloom with Counter and Dynamic Punch, Blaziken with Counter and Overheat, Entei with Fire Spin or Fire Fang and Overheat, Flareon with Fire Spin and Overheat, and Charizard with Fire Spin Blast Burn. Those are the 7 Pokemon that technically do the highest possible damage, highest DPS to Regice. Now, for the source of these numbers I was getting for highest DPS and TDO, I used GamePress.com. They have a lot of really good information, and I really like the graphs that they use in order for you to kind of visually see the balances between DPS and TDO. And here's the list of the Pokemon that I put together that, in my opinion, have the best balance between DPS and TDO. Those Pokemon are, in order of best, working my way down, Moltres, Fire Spin Overheat, Entei, Fire Spin or Fire Fang and Overheat, Machamp, Counter or Karate Chop and Dynamic Punch, Metagross with Bullet Punch, Flash Cannon, Tyranitar with Smackdown, Stone Edge, Heracross with Counter, Dynamic Punch, Hariyama with Counter and Dynamic Punch, and Mewtwo with Confusion, Focus Blast. Now, I will put a link in the description for the numbers that I was looking at, GamePress.com. That way you guys have the opportunity to kind of look at the numbers and decide for yourself what you really think the best counters are. But if you don't really feel like investing all the energy into the research that I did, then you can feel comfortable with the list that I just described. Now, remember, when you're choosing your teams for these counters for Regice, there's some things you want to take into consideration, which would be the weather at the time. You definitely are going to want to start leaning toward the Pokemon that are getting a current weather boost when you're choosing your counters. So if it's sunny, use more of those fire types. If it's partly cloudy, Tyranitar will do a little bit more damage. And the other thing to really consider when you're fighting Regice is what moves it has. The 3 charge moves for Regice are Earthquake, Focus Blast, and Blizzard. Now, personally, I don't waste a whole lot of time with kind of putting my teams together around its quick move, but for its charge move, absolutely I do. And especially for Regice, you're definitely going to want to choose your counters around what move it has. Now, if you're curious as to how you would know what move Regice has before you go into lobby, technically, if you want, you could just jump in the raid before your friends and check for yourself. But if you don't want to go through all that, you could just look at the recommended list of Pokemon that it gives you and figure it out based off of that. For example, if the recommended Pokemon include Tyranitar, then you know that Regice is not going to have Earthquake or Focus Blast, because Tyranitar takes super effective damage from those moves, and Pokemon Go wouldn't recommend Tyranitar against those 2 moves. So now I'd like to show you guys the 3 teams that I made to fight Regice with. I always make a team, 1 for each charge move that a raid boss has. So my teams are named Earthquake, Focus Blast, and Blizzard right now. So here's my first team, Earthquake. It starts off with Moltres, then Machamps, Hariyama, then Rayquaza and Dragonite. Now, I know I didn't mention Rayquaza and Dragonite previously, but it's okay to use Pokemon like this that have general high DPS when you don't necessarily have the best counters leveled up high enough. Sure, I have Flareons and Blazikens, but they're all below level 30, and my level 40 Rayquaza and Dragonites are going to end up doing much more damage. So that's something that you have to take into account for. You have to find a balance between Pokemon that are good counters and Pokemon that you have that have general high DPS and are much more higher level than your counters. So keep that in mind. Moving on to my second team, it's Blizzard. And for my Blizzard team, it's Moltres, Machamps, again. Then I have Tyranitar, and then Hariyama and Metagross. And then here's my last team, Focus Blast. I have Moltres and Machamps again, then Hariyama, Metagross, then Rayquaza. So hopefully that kind of gives you an extra perspective how to build a team for Regice. Well, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope this information was helpful for you. I hope that I was able to maximize the efficiency for your Regice raids. And drop a comment below and let me know if it was helpful for you guys. I'd love your feedback. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment and I'll be sure to answer that as well. To finish off the video, I'll actually show you guys a Regice raid that I did personally, just to give you a little bit of perspective as to how I would go about doing a Regice raid. So, come on, I'll show you. Alright, I am here at the Glendale post office here with my friends from the Glendale Goers. We're about to do a Regice raid here. So I'll get to show you guys how I do a Regice raid. We're going to look at the recommended list to see which move it has. So I already know that this Regice has Blizzard because, as you can see, the recommended list has Tyranitars in there, and it wouldn't recommend a Tyranitar if it was Earthquake or Focus Blast. So I'm going to scroll over here to my Blizzard team. It's got the Moltres, Machamps, a Tyranitar, Hariyama, and Metagross. And you can see that my team that I put together for Blizzard is quite a bit different from the recommended list. So even though Pokemon Go generally does a pretty decent job giving you some good recommendations for the raid, they really aren't the best. So using raid guides like this should help you guys out a lot to really maximize the efficiency for your raids. Alright, we're starting up the raid here. In general, my friends here are actually using pretty decent counters. There's a couple of Agrons. Aggron's not necessarily the best. It is a steel type, but it really doesn't have very high DPS, so, you know, if Aggron is one of your stronger Pokemon, go ahead and use it. If you don't have really anything else better, but it's not necessarily one of the best counters. I see a couple of Arcanines in here, that's a pretty decent counter as well. And there's even a Ho-Oh in here. Ho-Oh is actually the tankiest of the best counters on that list that I was looking at GamePress.com. Again, not necessarily the highest DPS, but because it is tankier, it's actually not bad. It has very significant TDO. So I am on Metagross now. This is the last Pokemon I had in my party. As you can see, I'm really not wasting a whole lot of time dodging. We have plenty of people for this raid, 8, so I'm not really worried about dodging the moves. It's not very necessary. Okay, so now Metagross is down. If this was a difficult raid, I would be using max revives for my best team and bringing him right back in. Okay, it's down. Now we just have to catch it. That's the hard part. So 1737, best is 1764. So this one's not going to be that impressive. It's not terrible, but definitely have caught better ones. I'm going to do the trick where the circle is small, wait for the attack animation, then throw it during the attack animation. That way it lands right in the center of the circle. There we go. There's another excellent curveball. Let's see if we can get it this time. Not quite. Last ball, come on. Are we gonna catch it? Got it. Got it on the last ball. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this raid helped you guys maximize your efficiency for raiding. Drop a comment below and let me know if it did help. And I'll be making some more raid guides for you. Catch you guys at the next one. See you around.